Before we begin, take a moment to settle yourself somewhere comfortable. Let your shoulders soften, let your breathing slow. This is a story told at the pace of starlight, meant for quiet hours when the world has loosened its grip and the mind is free to wander without needing to arrive anywhere in particular. There is nothing you need to remember, nothing you need to hold on to. If you drift, that's perfectly fine. The sun has been here a very long time. It can wait for you. Far above the ordinary concerns of days and deadlines, beyond weather and seasons and the turning of clocks, there is a presence that never truly rests. The sun hangs in the sky with such consistency that it feels dependable, almost gentle, as though it were simply a glowing backdrop to our lives. It rises, it sets, it warms the skin, it pulls shadows across the ground. We build our days around it without thinking too much about what it actually is. But the sun is not quiet. It is not a calm fire or a steady lamp. It is a restless ocean of heat and motion, a vast sphere of charged particles in constant turmoil, churning and folding in on itself under forces so large they defy ordinary intuition. Every second, deep within its core, unimaginable pressure crushes hydrogen atoms together, releasing energy that will spend hundreds of thousands of years working its way outward before finally escaping as light. The warmth on your face this morning began its journey long before human history had a name, and even that slow, patient glow is only one expression of the sun's nature. Closer to the surface, where the light finally breaks free, the sun's behaviour grows more complicated. It spins, but not as a solid body. Its equator turns faster than its poles, stretching its magnetic field like taffy pulled between uneven hands. Invisible lines of force twist and knot, loop and tangle, storing energy quietly, the way tension builds in a bent branch or a wound spring. For days or weeks, nothing seems to happen. From a distance, the sun looks serene. Then, without warning, it isn't. Dark patches sometimes appear on the sun's face, places where intense magnetic fields push up through the glowing surface, interrupting the flow of heat from below. These regions are cooler than their surroundings, though cool is a relative word here, still hot enough to vaporize anything humanity has ever made. Seen from Earth, they look like blemishes, shadows against the light. Scientists give them numbers and names, track them as they rotate slowly across the solar disk, watching for subtle signs of strain. Most of the time, those signs pass quietly. The magnetic knots relax. The sun turns on, indifferent, unchanged. But occasionally, the stress becomes too much. When that happens, the magnetic field lines can no longer hold their shape. They snap and reconnect in a violent rearrangement, releasing energy that has been building invisibly for days. The process takes seconds. The consequences travel across space. On one such day, not long ago, this tension reached its limit. Somewhere on the sun's surface, in a region that had been quietly growing more complex with each rotation, the balance finally broke. Magnetic fields that had been twisted tight suddenly let go, flinging energy outward in every direction. Light across the spectrum burst free at once, racing away at the ultimate speed limit of the universe. 8 minutes later, that light reached Earth. Most people never noticed. The sky did not change colour. The ground did not tremble. But high above the atmosphere, subtle systems responded instantly. Particles in the upper air shifted. Radio signals wavered. Instruments designed to listen for such things registered a clear message from the sun, one that said, without emotion or intent, that something powerful had just occurred. And that flash was only the beginning. Behind the light came matter, a vast cloud of solar plasma, billions of tons of it, torn directly from the sun's outer atmosphere and hurled into space. This was not a flame or an explosion in the familiar sense, but a bubble of electrified gas carrying with it a fragment of the sun's magnetic field, frozen into its structure as it expanded outward. It moved faster than anything humans have ever built, crossing distances that normally feel impossibly large with quiet determination. From Earth, there was no way to see it with the naked eye. Space between worlds looks empty, calm, black. But this cloud was moving through a medium that is anything but empty, riding the ever-present solar wind, reshaping itself as it went, growing larger, flatter, more complex with every passing hour. Its path was already set. The physics had been decided in the moment the sun released its grip. On the ground, life went on. People slept. Others woke to alarms and morning light, roads filled, screens flickered to life. Very few were aware that a piece of the sun was now on its way, that the space between here and there had suddenly become a place of motion and consequence. In quiet rooms filled with monitors and data streams, a small number of observers watched the numbers change, watched models update, watched the invisible approach of something that could not be stopped, only anticipated. There is something humbling about that distance. 93 million miles sounds vast, a buffer of safety so large it feels absolute. And yet, when the sun decides to reach out, that gulf can be crossed in less than a day. The emptiness between planets becomes intimate. Cause and effect draw close enough to touch. This is not a story of malice or intention. The sun does not aim or choose. It releases energy because that is what its physics demands, because magnetic fields under strain must eventually relax. It does what it has always done, long before there were satellites to worry about or power grids to protect. Long after we are gone, it will do the same. For now, all that mattered was that something had begun. A release, a journey, a quiet countdown measured not in fear, but in motion. And as the sun continued to burn, indifferent and brilliant, a vast cloud of magnetized plasma slipped into the dark, threading its way through space, carrying with it the potential to disturb a small, fragile world that depends so completely on the light of the star that was now sending something more. The journey had started, and space, which only appears empty, was about to show just how alive it really is. The journey begins in silence. Once the sun releases its hold, once that vast cloud of charged matter slips free and starts outward, there is no sound, no sensation that would register to human senses. Space does not echo. There is no rush of wind, no visible trail left behind. From a distance, nothing appears to change at all. The sun continues to shine with its familiar steadiness, and the darkness beyond it remains dark, patient, and seemingly still. But space is not empty, no matter how empty it looks. Between the sun and earth stretches a thin, invisible medium, a constant outflow of particles known as the solar wind. It moves steadily outward in all directions, carrying with it fragments of the sun's magnetic field, shaping the space around every planet it touches. It is more like a slow river than a vacuum, gentle most days, flowing past Earth without consequence. And now, moving through that river, the storm begins its long passage. At first, the ejected cloud is compact, dense, still bearing the clear imprint of its origin. Its magnetic structure remains tightly wound, its edges sharply defined. But almost immediately it starts to change. Released into a less crowded environment, it expands, stretching outward like breath into cold air. The front edge pushes against the slower solar wind ahead of it, compressing the particles there, piling them up into a boundary that marks its advance. This boundary is not a wall, but a transition, a place where conditions shift suddenly, where speed, density, and magnetic strength rise together. A shock wave forms, racing ahead of the main body like a ripple spreading across water, long before the stone itself reaches the surface. Behind it, the heart of the storm follows, steady and immense, carrying with it the frozen twist of solar magnetism that will matter so much later. As hours pass, the cloud grows broader and thinner, its original shape distorted by motion and resistance. It flattens slightly, like something pressed from behind while drifting forward. The sun's influence weakens with distance, replaced by the subtle push and pull of the surrounding solar wind. Internal currents flow, magnetic fields slowly rotate. The storm is not static. It is alive with change, evolving moment by moment as it travels. And yet, from Earth, this entire transformation remains unseen. There is a long stretch of space where the storm passes beyond the reach of direct observation. Telescopes that watch the sun can no longer follow it, and those near Earth cannot yet feel it. This blind zone is filled with estimation and patience. Models run quietly, projecting paths and arrival times based on experience and physics. The numbers adjust slightly, then again, as conditions shift in ways no model can perfectly predict. Sometimes the solar wind ahead is thinner than expected, offering less resistance, allowing the storm to glide faster than planned. Sometimes remnants of earlier solar activity linger in its path, altering its speed, nudging its trajectory. Space remembers what has passed through it recently, and that memory shapes what comes next. As the storm moves, something else begins to spill forward. At the leading edge of the shock, particles are caught and accelerated, bouncing back and forth across the boundary, gaining energy with each pass. Protons and heavier ions are flung ahead of the main cloud, racing outward at speeds that approach that of light itself. They do not wait for the bulk of the storm to arrive, they go on ahead, messengers of what is coming, reaching Earth while the larger structure is still far away. Their arrival is quiet but consequential. High above the planet, detectors notice the increase, a rising tide of invisible rain. The numbers climb slowly at first, then more steadily, marking the approach of something far larger still in transit. These particles seep into regions where Earth's magnetic shielding is thinner, brushing the edges of systems designed to endure them, testing limits that most days are never challenged. Below, the planet continues to turn. Night becomes morning in one hemisphere while dusk settles in another. Cities glow softly against the dark. Oceans roll, indifferent to events unfolding far above their surfaces. Most people remain unaware that the space surrounding their world has become more active, more charged, more restless than usual. And far upstream, still tens of millions of miles away, the storm continues its patient approach. Eventually it reaches a point of watchfulness. A small spacecraft positioned between Earth and the Sun, held in balance by gravity and motion, waits in the flow of the solar wind. This is where the emptiness finally speaks. Instruments there feel the change before Earth does, recording the sudden rise in speed, the tightening of magnetic fields, the unmistakable signature of an arriving front. From this point, the remaining distance is short, minutes to an hour. Enough time to notice, to prepare, but not enough to alter what has already been set in motion. The storm has crossed nearly all the space there is to cross. Its long journey through darkness, through shifting currents and unseen interactions is almost complete. What remains is the meeting, a meeting between a travelling fragment of the Sun and a planet wrapped in its own magnetic cocoon. A meeting that will leave no mark on stone or soil, but will briefly light the sky, stir invisible currents, and remind a small world that even in darkness, even in apparent stillness, space is always moving. And now, the moving reaches us. The moment of contact arrives without ceremony. There is no flash in the sky, no tremor underfoot, no signal that would draw the attention of anyone standing on the ground. Earth does not feel the storm in any way a human body could register. And yet, all around the planet, delicate instruments notice at once. Needles shift, numbers jump, lines that have been steady for hours bend sharply, as if something enormous has just brushed past. The shock reaches us first. It presses against Earth's magnetic field the way a wave presses against a shoreline, compressing the invisible bubble that surrounds the planet. The magnetosphere tightens, pulled inward on the side facing the Sun, stretched further on the night side like a living thing reacting instinctively to pressure. This adjustment happens quickly, rippling around the globe faster than sound could ever travel, a silent acknowledgement that something has changed. For a brief moment, the planet holds its breath. Then the storm begins to pour in. Behind the shock comes the body of the cloud itself, dense with charged particles and threaded with magnetic lines that do not belong to Earth. As these foreign fields press against our own, the outcome depends on their orientation, on a subtle alignment that cannot be known until the encounter is already underway. Northward fields slide past with relative ease. Southward ones connect, opening pathways where energy can flow inward. This time, the alignment favours connection. Magnetic lines link and rearrange, allowing solar energy to seep into Earth's protective cocoon, filling it slowly, steadily, the way water fills a basin. The magnetosphere swells and distorts, storing this energy until it has no choice but to release it again, sending charged particles racing along invisible routes toward the poles. High above the atmosphere, systems designed for calm conditions begin to feel the strain. Satellites move through regions that have grown more hostile, their electronics bathed in particles that slip through shielding, and leave tiny marks of disruption behind. Most of these effects are brief and manageable, corrected automatically, logged quietly, unnoticed by the people who depend on them. Above the poles, the upper atmosphere changes character. Radiation from earlier arrivals has already altered the delicate balance of charged layers that help radio signals travel long distances. Now, with the storm fully engaged, those layers thicken and thin unpredictably, absorbing some frequencies while reflecting others in unfamiliar ways. Communication that relies on these paths bends, fades, reroutes. The planet adapts, switching to backups, finding alternate routes through the invisible, and slowly, gently, the sky begins to glow. Charged particles spiral downward along magnetic lines, guided with patient inevitability toward regions where Earth's field dips closest to the surface. As they meet atoms of oxygen and nitrogen high above the ground, energy is exchanged. Electrons jump to higher states, pause for the briefest instant, then fall back again, releasing light as they do. Green appears first, faint and distant, followed by softer reds higher up, where the air is thinner and collisions are rarer. The aurora spreads outward from its usual haunts, stretching toward lower latitudes, reaching places where it is seldom seen. It does not rush. It drapes itself across the sky like slow-moving fabric, folding and unfolding in silence. For many, the experience is quiet and personal. Someone steps outside late at night, notices an unfamiliar brightness to the north, a subtle colour that does not belong to city lights or moonrise. A camera captures hues the eye can barely register, translating faint photons into vivid memory. There is wonder, but not fear. The sky feels alive, responsive, as if something far away has briefly touched the atmosphere. On the ground, currents flow where they normally would not. Long conductors, stretched across continents, respond to the shifting magnetic environment by carrying tiny electric surges, induced not by power plants or switches, but by space itself. Systems built with this possibility in mind adjust their loads, redistribute stress, warm slightly, then cool again as the storm ebbs and flows. Nothing dramatic happens. Nothing needs to. This is not catastrophe. It is reminder. The storm lasts for hours, rising and falling in intensity as the magnetic cloud passes, its internal structure rotating, offering periods of stronger connection and moments of relief. Each fluctuation sends another gentle pulse through the magnetosphere, another wave of light through the upper air. The planet responds the way it always has, flexing rather than breaking. Eventually the pressure eases. The main body of the cloud slides past, its grip loosening, its influence fading as it moves onward into space. The magnetic fields begin to relax toward familiar shapes. Energy input slows. The aurora retreats northward, thinning, dimming, dissolving back into darkness. By morning, for most people, there is no sign that anything unusual occurred. Power flows. Signals stabilize. Satellites continue their silent orbits. Life resumes its habitual rhythm, unaware that for a night the boundary between Earth and the Sun grew thinner, more permeable, more alive than usual. But the effects linger quietly. Data will be studied, measurements compared. The storm will be named and classified, placed into context alongside others that came before. And beneath all of that analysis lies a simple truth that does not require numbers to be understood. Earth lives inside the influence of a star. Most days that influence is gentle, nourishing, essential. Some days it is more complicated, charged, dynamic, capable of reaching across darkness and brushing the fragile systems we have built around ourselves. The storm has passed, but the connection remains. And to understand why it always will, why this exchange between star and planet is not an exception but a natural rhythm, we have to look more closely at the sun itself and at the deep, patient forces that drive its restless behaviour. To understand why moments like this are not accidents, why they return again and again across years and centuries, it helps to drift inward, away from Earth for a while, and rest our attention on the sun itself. Not the sun as a symbol or a clock in the sky, but the sun as it truly is. At its heart, far beyond anything light can escape from quickly, the sun is weight pressing inward on itself. Gravity gathers nearly all the mass of the solar system into one place, squeezing matter until temperature and pressure rise beyond familiar meaning. In that buried core, hydrogen atoms are forced together, slowly, relentlessly, fusing into helium and releasing energy in the process. This is not a flame that flickers. It is a deep, steady conversion, turning mass into light with quiet persistence. The energy released there does not rush outward. It wanders. Photons begin their journey trapped in a dense sea of charged particles, colliding, scattering, changing direction countless times. What will one day become sunlight may spend hundreds of thousands of years drifting through the sun's interior, a patient migration through layers that shift and churn like thick liquid stone. Time moves differently here, stretched and softened by density. Eventually that energy reaches regions where motion takes over. Above the core lies a vast zone where heat is carried not by light alone, but by movement. Hot plasma rises, cooler material sinks. The sun's surface takes on a granulated appearance, like a slow boil seen from a great distance. Nothing is still. Everything circulates, and above this visible surface the sun grows stranger still. The atmosphere of the sun does not cool as it fades outward the way intuition might suggest. Instead, beyond the glowing photosphere, temperatures climb again, soaring to millions of degrees in the tenuous corona that extends far into space. This inversion puzzled scientists for generations, until the quiet answer revealed itself in magnetism. The sun is threaded through with magnetic fields born of motion and rotation. But the sun does not rotate as a single piece. Its equator turns faster than its poles, and this difference matters. Magnetic lines anchored in the plasma are stretched, twisted, and folded over time, storing energy the way tension builds invisibly in strained rope. Sunspots are one expression of this hidden stress. Where magnetic fields concentrate, they suppress the upward flow of heat, creating darker regions that mark areas of intense magnetic activity. These spots often appear in pairs or clusters, connected by invisible arches that loop high into the corona. Plasma flows along these loops, tracing shapes that cannot be seen directly, but whose presence is felt in motion and light. Most of the time, these magnetic structures endure. They shift, adjust, release small amounts of energy without consequence. The sun tolerates an extraordinary degree of imbalance before it reacts in any dramatic way. This tolerance is part of what makes its eruptions feel sudden. Tension builds quietly, patiently, beyond any human timescale of awareness, and then, when limits are reached, the system changes state. Magnetic reconnection is the moment when field lines that have been forced too close together snap and rejoin in new configurations. The stored energy is released almost instantly, heating plasma to extreme temperatures and flinging particles outward at astonishing speeds. What we perceive as a solar flare is the radiative expression of this rearrangement. What we experience later as a storm is the material consequence. These events are not rare in the life of the sun. They follow rhythms tied to an 11-year cycle of activity, during which the number of sunspots rises and falls, the magnetic field reorganizes, and the likelihood of powerful eruptions increases. During quieter years, the sun appears calmer, its surface less crowded with complexity. During active years, it becomes restless, dotted with regions primed for release. Even so, no cycle can predict the exact moment of eruption. The processes involved are chaotic, sensitive to small changes, unfolding on scales too fine and too fast to forecast precisely. We can know that storms are more likely. We cannot know exactly when they will come. The sun keeps its own counsel. What we can do is watch. We observe the sun constantly now, across wavelengths invisible to human eyes, tracking its surface, its atmosphere, its breath of particles flowing outward through space. We listen for subtle changes, measure the solar wind, note the orientation of magnetic fields carried toward Earth. These observations do not grant control. They grant awareness, and awareness buys time. Minutes, sometimes hours. Enough to prepare, to brace systems that are sensitive to conditions beyond Earth's atmosphere. Enough to turn knowledge into resilience, even if only partially. Still, for all this understanding, the relationship remains unequal. The same physics that makes life possible here also guarantees moments of disruption. The sun cannot offer warmth without also offering instability. It cannot fuse matter without occasionally releasing energy in directions we would rather it did not. This is not cruelty. It is balance. We live in the extended atmosphere of a star. Most days that atmosphere feels benign, a gentle glow overhead, a steady rhythm of light and dark. On other days it reminds us that beneath the calm surface lies constant motion, pressure, and change. The storms are not exceptions to the sun's nature, they are expressions of it. And when the sky glows with unfamiliar colours, when instruments record sudden shifts, when systems feel strain and then recover, what we are witnessing is not an attack, but a conversation written in plasma and magnetic fields. A dialogue that has been ongoing for billions of years. To place this moment in context, to understand what it means beyond the present night and the fading aurora, we have to widen our view again. We have to remember that this is not the first time Earth has been touched this way, and it will not be the last. The past has lessons to offer, whispered through history and stone and old records of strange skies, and in those lessons lies a quiet warning, waiting to be heard. Long before satellites trace silent paths overhead, long before power lines stitched continents together, the sky was already keeping records. Stone remembers slowly, ice remembers more faithfully, and people, when something truly strange appears above them, remember in stories that travel farther than any instrument ever could. There was a morning once when the sun looked wrong. Not dimmed, not eclipsed, but suddenly alive with light where no light should be. A brightening within darkness, an intensity that caught the eye and refused to be ignored. The observer watching that sun could not know what they were seeing in modern terms. There were no names yet for flares or magnetic fields. There was only the quiet certainty that something extraordinary had occurred, and that it had come without invitation. Hours later, night fell, and the sky answered. Colour spilled across latitudes that had never known it. Reds and whites and shimmering veils appeared overhead, bright enough to read by, bright enough to wake sleeping towns who thought dawn had come early. The heavens seemed to ripple, as if a curtain had been pulled back on a deeper layer of reality. People stood still in fields and streets, unsure whether to pray or simply watch. And on the ground, the newest technology of that age began to behave as though it too had become alive. Wires hummed without power, sparks leapt from metal, messages travelled along lines that had been disconnected, carried not by batteries, but by the planet itself. The world's early nervous system trembled, confused by a force it was never designed to accommodate. That night passed. The lights faded, life resumed, but the record remained. It is tempting to imagine that such events belong to a distant, simpler world, a time when humanity was small and the consequences were limited to wonder and inconvenience. But the sun does not change its nature to suit our progress. Its cycles continue, patient and indifferent, repeating patterns long enough that history begins to echo itself. Again and again, in different centuries the sky has spoken. Rail systems once faltered, communication stumbled, power failed suddenly, not because of storms on Earth, but because of storms in space. Each time, the lesson arrived quietly afterward, when engineers and scientists and planners sat with the aftermath and realised how deeply connected their creations were to forces far beyond the atmosphere. The storm you have just followed was not the most powerful the sun can produce. It was not the largest, not the fastest, not the most disruptive. It was, instead, something more subtle and perhaps more important. It was a reminder delivered without catastrophe, a demonstration staged on a scale large enough to notice, but small enough to survive without lasting harm. A warning spoken softly. We live now in a world threaded with systems that assume stability. Electricity flows constantly. Satellites hold their positions. Navigation depends on signals that cross space without obstruction. These systems work beautifully when the sun is calm, when its breath is gentle, and its magnetic moods remain distant. But calm is not the sun's permanent state. Once or twice in a human lifetime, perhaps less, perhaps more, the physics align in such a way that the star at the centre of our system releases something far larger than what we have just witnessed. A storm that travels faster, carries stronger fields, presses harder against Earth's defences. A storm whose effects would not fade quietly by morning. No malice would be involved, no intention, only the same processes you already know scaled upward, intensified by chance and timing. Preparation in this context is not about fear, it is about patience, about accepting that some risks are woven into existence itself, and that resilience is built slowly, thoughtfully, over years rather than moments. The sun does not demand urgency, it demands respect. Ice cores and tree rings continue to collect their silent data. Instruments watch and listen. Engineers adapt designs. Knowledge accumulates layer by layer like sediment settling at the bottom of a long, slow river. Each storm adds another thin line to that record, another opportunity to learn without being overwhelmed. And when the sun is quiet again, when its surface smooths and its breath steadies, it is easy to forget. Easy to look up at a familiar sky and assume permanence to mistake routine for safety. But the deeper truth is more comforting than it is frightening. The universe is not fragile. It is active, it moves, it changes, and within that motion, life has learned to persist. Tonight, or this morning, or whenever you're listening, the sun is still burning. It burned before the first story was told. It will burn after the last one fades. Most days, it will simply rise and set, generous and unremarkable, offering light without asking anything in return. And occasionally, it will remind us that we live close to something vast, something powerful, something older than memory. If you feel yourself drifting now, that is all right. The warning does not need your full attention to exist. It will wait, just as the sun waits between its moments of release. Stone and water and darkness are patient teachers. So is the sky. The aurora has faded. The instruments are quiet. The planet has settled back into its familiar rhythm, turning once more beneath a star that appears calm again, but not silent, never silent. And as Earth continues its long journey through space, wrapped in magnetism and atmosphere, carrying its fragile web of life and technology, the conversation between planet and star continues, unbroken, unhurried, written in light and in time,